Welcome to a classic clash of titans. We have Vassily Smyslov with the white pieces against Wolfgang Uhlmann. This game starts quietly but quickly explodes into a complex strategic battle, evolving from a reti into a King's Indian-style setup. Smyslov opens with a super flexible setup, knight to f3, pawn to c4, and now pawn to b4, preparing to put that powerful bishop on b2. Uhlmann responds symmetrically, developing his pieces and getting ready to castle kingside. Both sides continue to develop logically. White shores up the center and castles, while black challenges immediately with the d5 pawn push. Pieces are flying onto the board, with both players completing their initial setup and eyeing the center. White pushes the pawn to b5, and this is the first small slip. It looks active, but it releases the central tension too early. A much stronger idea was to capture on d5 first, keeping the position fluid and maintaining a slight edge. Following that pawn push, we see a flurry of exchanges. Black takes the pawn on b5, white recaptures with the knight, and then pawns are traded in the center. The board is opening up as black stakes a claim with a pawn on e5. And now Uhlmann starts to build the pressure. His rook slides to c8, the e-pawn marches forward to e4, and the knight leaps into the beautiful c5 square, causing all sorts of problems for white's position. White plays bishop to a3, a serious misstep. This move looks active, but it misses the real threat. Black could have punished this immediately with the brilliant knight to h5. The idea is to hit the weak light squares. After h3, bishop takes e2, followed by bishop takes d4 would simply win material, but black misses it. The knight drops back to d7, and Smyslov is let off the hook. That critical knight to h5 jump was the key to seizing a huge, potentially winning advantage. A massive opportunity slips away for Uhlmann. Smyslov breathes a sigh of relief and improves his position with rook to c1, connecting the rooks and controlling the open file. Wow, what a move. Uhlmann unleashes the absolutely stunning queen to a5. This is a brilliant sound queen sacrifice. The idea is to give up the queen for the bishop on a3 and the knight on d4, completely shattering white's coordination and leaving black's pieces totally dominant. An incredible concept. Smyslov accepts the challenge. He takes the knight on c5, and after a series of trades, the dust settles. Uhlmann has two incredibly active minor pieces and a rook for the queen, creating a fascinating and unbalanced position. And Smyslov answers with a brilliancy of his own. Rook takes the knight on c5. An absolutely fantastic exchange sacrifice to give back some material. This move completely neutralizes black's attack, removes the dangerous knight, and swings the evaluation of the game right back to level. What a shot! Black has no choice. The queen must take the rook on c5. This is the only move that keeps the position in the balance after white's incredible sacrifice. And white's only good reply is knight takes the pawn on e4. Another critical only move find from Smyslov to keep the fight going. The tactics are just razor sharp. Now we enter a complex phase where white's powerful queen and knight duo battle against black's well-coordinated minor pieces. Smyslov pushes the pawn to d4, challenging black's central control and kicking the bishop away, while his own knight probes for weaknesses from f6. The pieces continue to dance. Both sides are carefully probing for an opening. Black pushes the pawn to f5, creating new dynamics and challenging white on the king side. Smyslov's knight is a true workhorse. It repositions from d2, jumps to the excellent c4 square, and then reroutes all the way to a5, constantly putting pressure on black's structure. Here, white plays rook to b1, a slight inaccuracy. It's a useful move, but the engine preferred rook to d1, preparing to meet black's most dangerous idea, a pawn break with f4. This gives black another chance, and this is the decisive moment of the game. Uhlmann has a golden opportunity to launch a winning attack, but he misses the critical idea. The move that would have changed everything was the pawn ramming forward to f war. After white is forced to capture on f4, the queen swoops into h4. White's queen can only defend from h1, and queen takes queen on h1 with check leads to a crushing attack. But back in the actual game, black plays the queen to b4, and the winning chance evaporates in an instant, and Smyslov pounces. The knight jumps to c4, the only move that fully capitalizes on black's mistake and secures a clear advantage for white. What a turnaround. Now Smyslov is firmly in the driver's seat. He calmly consolidates his advantage, repositioning his knight and rook. Black, realizing the danger, finally pushes the pawn to f4, but it's too little, too late. White simply recaptures with the pawn on f4, opening the e-file for the rook and tightening the grip. Under pressure, black makes another inaccuracy. Moving the queen to f6 allows white to increase the pressure. A much tougher defense was to challenge the pawn immediately. The better try was bishop takes the pawn on f4. After white recaptures on f4, the rook can take the pawn on d4, the knight takes on b6, and the rook recaptures on f4, holding the position together. Instead of that difficult line, black plays the queen to f6, and white's advantage grows even larger. White has a winning position, but misses the most clinical finish. Smyslov plays a good move, but there was an absolute hammer blow available. The killer idea was the pawn blasting forward to d5. After rook to e7, the rook swings to c6. The queen moves to d4, and rook to e6 would have sealed the deal immediately. But in the game, Smyslov plays the knight to c3. It's still a winning position, but it gives black a bit more room to breathe. Black's queen recaptures the pawn on d4, but white's pieces are swarming. The knight lands on d5, and the h-pawn starts rolling forward, creating even more weaknesses around the black king. The attack is relentless. The maneuvering continues. White's queen and rook control key files, completely dominating the board. Black's queen tries to be a nuisance by landing on b2, but Smyslov's coordination is just too good. Smyslov now forces the issue. After some precise king and rook moves, he plays queen to c3, forcing a queen trade. This is classic Smyslov, confidently transitioning into a completely winning endgame where his technical skill will shine. And the recapture is perfect. The knight takes the queen on cell3, the only move that maintains white's decisive advantage in the endgame. With the queens off the board, white's knight makes its way to the powerful e4 square, a perfect outpost to control the action. Black's rook slides to d7, but this is too passive. To have any fighting chance, Uhlmann needed to play the much more active rook to d4, creating counterplay and challenging white's pieces. And now we see a masterclass in endgame technique. Smyslov's knight, rook, and bishop work in perfect harmony, restricting black's pieces, probing for weaknesses, and slowly tightening the noose. Black's rook moves to e7, another slight inaccuracy. The defense is proving too difficult. The better try was rook to d3, which would have posed more complex problems for white to solve. White presses the advantage, pushing the pawn to f5. This move attacks black's structure and creates the terrifying threat of a passed pawn. And under immense pressure, black's king steps to g7. This is a step in the wrong direction. The last real chance for counterplay was to push the b-pawn to b5, but now white's advantage is decisive. The winning pawn storm begins. The g-pawn advances to g4, followed by the f-pawn to f4, completely suffocating the black king. Black's rook moves to d8, but it's a futile gesture. It was absolutely essential to play pawn to h6 to try and slow down white's unstoppable pawn avalanche on the king side. And here comes the crusher. White pushes the pawn to g5, clamping down further and taking away all hope for the black king. Black's bishop moves to c5, and that is the final decisive error. The king had to try and run for its life via f8. After this move, white has a forced win. Smyslov is completely winning, but he misses the most direct path to victory. He plays a very strong move, but there was a surgical strike to end it on the spot. The fastest win was pawn to f6 with check. The king is forced to g6. The white king simply walks up to f3. The black king is pushed to h5, and knight to g3 check is completely crushing. But in the actual game, the king simply steps to f3, still easily winning, but not the most precise. Black can only try to hold the fortress together with bishop back to f8. White plays bishop to c8, another slight imprecision. The winning idea was still the same. The pawn push to f6 with check was the key to victory. Black's rook moves to a7, but this isn't the best defense. The rook really belonged on b8, preparing to fight against white's passed pawns on the queen side, and there it is. Smyslov finally plays the decisive move, pawn to f6 with check. This forces the black king to the back rank on h8, setting the stage for the final attack. The final combination is beautiful. The f-pawn advances again, and the bishop swings over to e6, creating an unstoppable mating net. There is no escape. Black gives one last desperate check with the rook to d3. But white's king simply steps up to f4. The threats are overwhelming, black's position is hopeless, and Uhlmann resigned. And so Smyslov wins, a truly magnificent and complex strategic battle. We saw brilliant sacrifices from both sides, but in the end, a critical mistake by Uhlmann allowed Smyslov to display his legendary endgame technique and grind out a victory in a long and grueling fight.